You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
This is Steve Sansweet of Rancho Obi-Wan, and you're listening to the 602 Club.
In Brightest Day and in Blackest Night, there's one place you can go. That's right, back to the 602 Club, your local watering hole for all things geeky. And I am just one of your hosts here, holding the lantern of truth and justice and the American way and green, Matthew Rushing. And with me, as she is every single week, Christy Morris.
AKA Sinestro, please.
Oh, going villain tonight. I love it.
Oh, yeah. I'm always
Fantastic.
the dark one.
Yes. And with us to round things out, our own Guy Gardner, John Mills.
I'm almost afraid to play this game and figure out who I am in the Green Lantern
That's
mythos.
what I just said. You're Guy Gardner.
You think so? Am I Guy Gardner?
I feel like you could be a bruiser.
Yeah, I could see that.
I mean, you're not Kyle Rayner. I mean, you are kind of artistic. So
let's be honest. I'm Parallax. That's who I am.
True. That's
who I am.
And if Christy's
I feed on
Sinestro,
your
you're
fear.
Parallax.
There you go.
Wow. This is going to get dark because, well, apparently I need the willpower of Hal Jordan tonight between you two. But we are going to be diving into none other than the infamous, which means it's so famous, it's infamous. That's right. If you get that joke, congratulations on you. We're talking about Green Lantern, but we're going to be talking about the extended edition with 9 extra minutes. That's right. We went all in, folks, to this. We're so excited. Before, we dive into the show, though, just a reminder, you can find us wherever you get your podcasts. You've got Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere podcasts can be had, you can find the 602 Club. Make sure you're subscribed there so you get the show as soon as it drops with amazing content like this, where we're talking about Green Lantern. You hit us up with a star rating review over on the Apple Podcasts to help the show continue to grow. You can find us on Twitter at TrekFM, or on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM. You can also find us online at Trek.fm, where you can see all the shows we're doing. And, of course, there's a contact section where you can send Christy and I an email. And then there's the Babel Conference, which is our listeners-only discussion group, where you can talk to listeners from all over the world about what we're doing here on Trek FM. But I wanted to start here. It's not on the outline, but I'm really interested because this is such kind of an infamous movie. Was this a movie you guys saw in the theater in the first place?
No.
Nope. Skip this one.
Man.
Yeah.
Well, I'm the only one.
I don't. It wasn't. This
so
is
that's
one of those
why
ones
it failed at the box office, because 1 and 3 saw it in the theaters.
Yeah.
Well,
Basically.
and I don't remember why I didn't, is the weird thing, because my husband did.
Right. It wasn't like a conscious choice. It has to be. Well, wait, what year was this again?
2011. Yeah.
2011. Yeah. Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, things were a little like bleh back then. So like that is right around the period where my film going like in the theater just like completely died out for a time because we had 2 young kids, and so it was just like, do you want to go to the movie theater? No, not really. I'd rather just sit down, just relax for a little bit.
I'm tired.
So, yeah, I'm just very tired right now. Yeah, driving 15 minutes to a movie theater to go take a chance on a movie and then drive back was like, that's an awfully big investment. So, and you couldn't even really do it in your pajamas.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I was, that was a really, really tough year for me because I was not only trying to finish my senior year of college, I was planning a wedding at the same time.
That'll do it.
That's pretty busy.
And I got really sick.
That is pretty busy.
So I was a little busy.
Well, I was the only one of us with no life at that point, and I was at the movies a lot, and I went and saw Green Lantern, and, honestly, I was excited about it because, we had been getting the Dark Knight trilogy, and so, like, hey, this looks good, looks fun, the trailers looked good, too, had gotten good word of mouth at like Comic-Con when they had showed like 11 minutes or something of it. So yeah, I mean, I didn't think it could go wrong at that point, especially after the success that Warner Brothers had been having with the Dark Knight trilogy. So,
had you read any of the Green Lantern comics, Matt?
I hadn't then. I've read a ton of Green Lantern now.
Okay.
I've read his Rebirth. I've read a bunch of the Blackest Night. I've read the whole Blackest Night series, and I've read the entire run of New 52, and I read a bunch of the Rebirth stuff that they did as well. And in fact, honestly, I stopped reading when we got to lately. Grant Morrison has been writing it, and I was not enjoying his take on Green Lantern, but I enjoy the character. I think it's a lot of fun, and the best thing about the Green Lantern Corps, especially with his Rebirth, was that they brought the entire spectrum of characters out, that it's not just willpower, but, you've got all the other power rings as well in that now. So, yeah. But no, I love the character. I just wasn't as familiar with him then as I actually am now. So it was actually interesting to go back to this and rewatch it for the first time since it came out in the theater, and get there. So, Christy, I know you do comics, and John, I know you've read some comics. Was Green Lantern ever in your pull list?
Yeah, I actually after my husband and I got married, then he had introduced me to the Green Lantern comics. So after the movie had come out, and I still hadn't seen it, and I believe it was the New 52 where I got started, but I did read some of Blackest Night as well. So I'm familiar, but I haven't read everything or even remember a ton other than, main character stuff.
Yeah, the majority of my comic book reading when I was younger was actually me stealing stuff out of my brother's collection. So Green Lantern was in there because he liked a wide variety of titles. My own preferences were more towards X-Men and Transformers comics, which were actually really good, G.I. Joe and the Knob and stuff like that. But Green Lantern was in the mix, because Green Lantern knew Batman, and so inevitably they would cross paths, and those sorts of things. But he's always been a character that I've been interested in, but not one that I was specifically drawn to. So vague familiarity with the lore and stuff like that, but no deep dive stuff for me.
Yeah. Okay. It's so interesting too, because, what's fascinating to me is a lot of the Green Lantern lore that we kind of think of as being established now was stuff that really kind of got established once they brought him back from the dead, after his whole thing with Parallax and kind of going insane, and they added so much stuff that is foundational now to the character in his Rebirth. So, which it's really cool, and it's a fascinating character. And obviously, there's more than one Green Lantern. There's a few different Green Lanterns, which is really cool as well, because a lot of people picked up, especially with Hal Jordan being gone, they liked the other characters they had, like Jon Stewart, or we were talking about the other was like Guy Gardner and stuff like that. So there's just so many things you can do with these characters being basically the intergalactic cops. And so I thought it was really fascinating, just this kind of idea. I was making fun of, Brightest Day, Blackest Night. But it was fascinating to me that, this is a movie where, the Dark Knight trilogy is about to wrap up in 2012. And so, Warner Brothers is looking to where they want to go next. Nolan's trilogy is a closed trilogy. It's not going to connect with anything else. And so they decide they want to go with Green Lantern. And this is something, they'd had in development since 97. They actually asked Kevin Smith to write the movie, and he said no, which I think that might have been a favor to the world. So, they had an idea for doing it basically being a comedy where Jack Black would have been the lead. I think that's a mistake too.
But see, the thing is, Warner Brothers, it's so interesting. Warner Brothers has a history of repeating itself. history repeats, all of that stuff. But, the Superman series had a light heart to it when it starts in 78. It had verisimilitude, but it had a light heart to it. And that devolves into self-parody by the end. Batman was in development as a comedy. Bill Murray was actually considered to play Batman at one point. It was going to be a spoof because, the 66 TV series.
Yeah.
So it was like, we're just going to do something like that. And fortunately, a better script comes up and cooler heads prevail sort of thing. So it makes perfect sense that they would have come into this and said, oh yeah, no, let's do a comedy with like Jack Black. Like that makes it's fascinating to me because these movie studio boards turn over so frequently, but then they all make the same mistakes. Mm-hmm. It's like, what was the point of replacing the old management if you guys just keep screwing up in the same ways? Like whoever said, oh, let's make a comedy with Jack Black, simply uttering that sentence, they should have just been picked up by the scruff of the suit and just like thrown down the hallway and been like, out, you're done, fired. Anybody ever says anything like that again, you're gone. So, but also to think that Nolan's whole success is rooting it in the real world, putting it in a way that the fans can relate to it. Why on earth would you say, well, that formula is working really well for us, so we're just going to go 180 degrees in the other direction? Like, that doesn't make sense. I don't know why people get possessed of those sorts of urges. Sorry for the rant, but it's just sort of like, I don't know why Warner keeps making the same mistakes.
I think you're absolutely right, because it seems strange to me that you would be thinking about, and part of this is that, this is a long development process from 97 all the way, but it's like, like you mentioned, their most successful Batman films had been up to, I guess, because Batman Robin is just a joke. It becomes a joke pretty quickly, but Batman Forever was relatively successful in the theaters. So,
technically, so was Batman and Robin. It was critical and fan response that killed that.
It's true. But it quickly becomes a joke, I think, for fandom very quickly. And so it seems strange that, you would think about going this way. And it's really not until 2007 where they decide that they hire Greg Berlanti, and that name's going to sound familiar to a lot of fans out there, because he's the one responsible for all the DC TV shows that are on right now, starting with Arrow all the way to, everything that they brought out so far. And his writing partner, and you had Michael Green and Mark Guggenheim, who's also involved with the DC TV. Not then, obviously, but, later on. And so, they're going to do basically an origin story. They're going to give you, Hal Jordan, and they're going to bring in your classic characters, the Carol Ferris and Kilowog and all that stuff. Guy Gardner was going to make an appearance. And but what's fascinating to me is that, Berlanti actually gets fired as writer and director, and he doesn't even finish working on the film. They bring in Martin Campbell to direct, who had, had a huge success with his James Bond relaunches with GoldenEye, and by that point, Casino Royale. Plus, he did The Mask of Zorro, which was hugely popular. So you bring in a guy like that. But then you read about Ryan Reynolds talking about, and he was promoting Deadpool. He said with Green Lantern, it really came down to like it feels like it's going to be a visionary movie, but then it's a studio story, the classic studio story where you get a poster, but we don't have a script. Let's start shooting. So it feels like this movie was kind of, back and forth, and that they didn't quite have everything they wanted together by the time they start filming, because I know they have to come back and do reshoots and everything. So it really does seem like kind of a mixed bag even behind the scenes. And then, of course, the movie's released, and it bombs at the box office. But we're here tonight to decide whether or not it deserves that reputation. And that's all apart because John Mills wrote a blog about this and got me thinking about we needed to revisit this film. And so,
sorry,
no, I think this is great. This is exactly what this show does. We're going to give it the critical eye and see if it actually does hold up. So, I wanted to ask you guys, because we talked about, Green Lantern isn't something that everybody's super familiar with, he's definitely a comic book fan's favorite. But I wanted to ask you, how does this movie then do as an introduction to a character that people don't know, like Batman and Superman? How do you feel like this movie handles that?
For me, I feel like they didn't quite give you enough on Hal as a character. They give you some basis for what kind of person he is, and obviously the trauma that his family's been through. But I really think that they jump more directly into the action they want for Hal and speeding it along, rather than spending a lot of time making you really care for him as a character. That's how I feel.
I agree. I think that the core issue with this movie that keeps it from being a great film is the fact that it feels structured like a TV pilot. It feels like we have to build the world, and so it's okay if we don't focus on the character because we'll get to that in the next episode. Right. What's important is that we establish the world that he's in and we build those sorts of things. And I think that if it has one big flaw, it's that it allows itself to lose its focus from the main character and focus more on what's going on in the world. So in a sense, Hal does not feel as important as he should in his own story by about halfway through the movie. He's important. He's my guide through this world, but I'm not given an opportunity to feel that emotional connection to him that I very much want, because Ryan Reynolds is a very charismatic on-screen presence, and the supporting cast around him is really good. And it feels like we're like one draft away from what this movie should be before they start shooting.
Yeah, and that actually reminds me too, there's parts where the main character is not even on screen.
Right.
And so then that makes me go,
yeah.
Wait, whose movie is this? This is Sinestro.
Right. And I think that is one of the things too, where I think this is the great debate between the extended cut and the theatrical cut. Is the extended cut seems to try to address that by reinserting that prologue scene with his dad so that we can know him as a child. And it's a way just to get, even though he's a younger version of himself, the main character on screen that much more quickly, as well as, give him more screen time. If not Ryan Reynolds, then at least the character has more screen time overall.
Yeah, it was interesting because I haven't seen the theatrical cut since it came out, but watching this one, I did feel like there's more of a connection with the character because we do spend more time with him as a child. In many ways, the way Batman Begins spends, a good chunk of time with Bruce as being a younger child. We really dive into who he is, who his parents is, the world that Bruce lives in as a child, to really build up that whole momentous occasion when he loses his parents. And this really, I think, tries to mimic that in some ways, where we're going about telling the story of how Hal is supremely affected by the loss of his father, who is doing a good job of raising his son, and yet by him not being able to complete the job and nobody kind of picking up that mantle really well, you get Hal being stuck in Arrested Development. He's never truly able to finish that development of what it means to become a man, which is, his father told him that, being scared is it's his job not to be. But his father never gets to elaborate on what that means. And so, to me, I was really connecting with the fact that at least, this extended cut, we're getting more of that time, so it informs who that character is when we see him, when Ryan Reynolds shows up, and he's kind of being classic, what we all know of as Ryan Reynolds, very irreverent and always making the joke, but it came across more of that's a reflex to keep people at arm's length on purpose rather than just Ryan Reynolds being Ryan Reynolds. So to me, this all works a little bit better than I remember it working when I saw the theatrical cut back in the day, which is fantastic. I still think, you guys are nailing it on the head. I looked, and Batman Begins is at 2 hours and 20 minutes. This movie, even with the extra 9 minutes, it's like, I think 2:14.
Mm-hmm.
So, an extra 6 minutes or something to make this movie like that length, or maybe 2 hours and 30 minutes. Like, allow there to be some more of that time where we really spend time with this character, and I think you can ameliorate a lot of the problems you guys just mentioned by giving us 10 more minutes of screen time where we're following this character kind of, because Hal's basically what Maverick from, really that's who he is. That's who they're playing him as. He's Maverick. And so, that whole movie is spent with, Maverick, being the hot shot and then failing when his best friend dies and like having that a big emotional push. Like this kind of, you just needed to allow that to breathe a little bit more, and I think you have an even stronger movie. But I'd got to say, so far, for me, extended cut, +1, in the sense that it's like, it's at least making some of these issues better.
Yeah, I having seen the theatrical very recently, and then watching the extended, I can go either way. I actually wind up, this is I know going to sound weird because I talk about how, it at least gives Hal more screen time. I think that I still wind up preferring the theatrical cut because of the fact that I think that it feels like two prologues sandwiched in front in the beginning there. I think that the better impulse is to get to Hal quicker and then extend his time, because having the kid as a flashback, I didn't need every bit that they gave in, the 1993 prologue, mainly because those key moments I got in the flashbacks while he's going, while he's plummeting to certain doom after the dogfight. I don't think that it detracts anything from the movie to have it in there, but I think it's sort of a wash sort of thing. I think that what they really, to speak to the point about like even just 6 more minutes, I think just 1 or 2 more emotional conversations, between him and Blake Lively, or even him and the, her dad who knew his dad, having a more emotional, quiet moment when all we really get is the chew him out scene after the dogfight sort of thing. Like, I know that it's somewhat cliched to have it in a movie, but then to have a quieter moment where we actually see him despondent, realizing he's screwed things up, and having that introspective moment, and then somebody sidle up to him at the bar and say, listen, I get it. It would be like Star Trek 09. Very pivotal when Pike sits down next to Kirk and is like, look, you got potential and you got to just get your act together. Like that, just a scene like that.
Yeah.
That makes a big difference in the movie.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's fascinating is that, this is in many ways that same type of story, because Hal Jordan is that kind of Chris Pine Kirk character, he's the rebel without a cause in many ways, because he doesn't have that male role model to really show him what true manhood looks like. And Hal doesn't get that till, later in the movie, so there isn't anybody on Earth to come to him other than Carol, which there's that messiness of the fact that they have this relationship that is more than just friends. It's that male-female dynamic that doesn't quite work to give Hal that male companionship he needs to get him over that hump and to really show him what he's missing. So I agree with you, John. If you had that, if you had a character, maybe even Carol's dad, to be the one
exactly.
who,
yeah.
I think that could have been really interesting. But, then you also run into that Hal needs to learn that lesson actually later in the movie, not at this exact moment, because he needs to get the ring and still basically fail, until he realizes, what courage really means. So, but I know I would say too, trying to introduce the Green Lantern Corps to people who don't know the Green Lantern Corps, it is so dense, and so I think they do as good a job as possible with that, to try and give you the bits and pieces that you need to make this make sense. But I don't envy them the position that they're in this introduction, because it is hard to explain the Green Lantern Corps succinctly, quickly.
Yeah.
Well, and you're looking at something where you're going right into it with explaining parallax and the green and yellow energy and all of this stuff, and it gets bogged down by its own mythos, basically. And yeah, I think it would have worked a lot better. I think there's maybe a little bit of Batman envy going on in terms of the League of Shadows. They pulled off introducing the League of Shadows, and they got that to work. But the difference is the League of Shadows was integral to the story itself, as opposed to being an external force to what was going on. And I think I think this works better if they have a smaller build, and then at the end, because maybe they've alluded to it earlier in the movie, that once you're ready, you'll understand the full power of everything that you're getting into. And then, he shows up and it's like 5 lanterns show up and they're like, we've got you. And, hey, here, and we go back, let's heal up. And then he sees how big the Corps really is. And they say, see, you're part of something much larger. And that's a big reveal moment, as opposed to, wait, who are the people with the big blue heads sitting on the thrones in the red talking to this guy who's got there's a lot going on there that's very comic booky in a very fun way, in a very entertaining way, but not in a very, it's so much, it's impossible to establish that deep connection you want to any of the elements.
Yeah, so. I think you said exactly what I was thinking, because I was listening to you say it and then going, oh my gosh, that's what I was thinking. It feels too much of explaining at the beginning, whereas most of the time I feel like I get more out of a movie in particular that has this much background to it that they're trying to dumb down a little bit, is if you jump into the story and then explain later. And so I feel like that's what you were getting at. And that's how I felt as well. It's like the beginning introduction out in space of just, the planets and trying to explain everything to you. If you're a fan who's never even heard of Green Lantern before, you're getting a lot of information dumped on you in that moment and going, yeah, okay, why do I care?
Right.
Well, and I feel like, as you're talking about, some of this is able to be added a little bit later when the Guardians talk to Sinestro and they really delve into this whole idea of like parallax and stuff. And I almost feel like you needed to find some ways to just basically not give the prologue for the lanterns at the beginning. You just needed to show, him get attacked and have to land on Earth, and don't explain really of any of that until you get to those more expositional scenes. So you're just getting to action. You're kind of seeing everything play out, and the movie will then, as Christy, we've talked about so many times, it's like you're just showing people things, then you'll tell them about what they've seen and help it make sense as you get to those places. So I think maybe that would have helped a little bit. So then again, you can take those minutes and use them just for the story with Hal and his dad at the beginning and really accentuate that part. So you feel like have that core of this story is about Hal. And part of that is because what's going to make Hal special? Because Hal Jordan he's the I Ching, honestly, of the Green Lantern Corps. I mean, he's done things that no other Green Lantern has ever done. I mean, he's the one who, defeats Parallax in the comics, and all of that. It comes back from the dead and all this crazy stuff that no other Green Lantern's done. So, he really is going to be this special character. And so spending time with him at the beginning, I think, would have been smart. So, it really fascinated me, though, the way that they kind of parallel the two characters of Hal and Hector And they do this with the editing, too, big time, of course, as they're making their rise and they're kind of discovering their powers. But for them, it really comes down to, like, to me, in this, it came down to them living in the shadow of their fathers. And one, Hector has a father who never really tries to understand him, and Hal has a father who dies, and nobody's there to pick up that mantle then and continue on with what his father was doing and teaching him. And I just thought it was really interesting to see the way that these two characters kind of go. One becomes really insular and just tries to become really smart, and so he can press people that way, and almost so antisocial. And Hector is so antisocial that he's trying not to care what anybody thinks of him. And Hal, he cares what everybody thinks of him. And part of that is like he's trying to show off all the time and be Mr. Macho Man. And neither of these really work for either of these men in making them truly happy in their lives whatsoever. And so I was kind of responding to watching this again, and like, that's a really interesting theme to play with. Like, what happens to men when they don't have, or boys when they don't have somebody there to help guide them along the path. And you can get these kind of divergent, basically you get these divergent delinquencies.
Yeah, I mean, I would go, I would take that, and I would say that the real interesting part between them is that you find out with Hector that Hal, at least, he knew his parents loved him, cared for him, were trying to give him the best start that they could. Whereas Hector is just an afterthought for his dad, a tool. And then later he becomes a tool, for power and for gain. Mm-hmm. So Hector has his great moment where he finally feels like, hey, they respect me. They want me involved in something like that. And he finds out that it's just his dad pulled a string. And Hector even has a very virtuous moment where he gets upset, where he says there are other people way more qualified that should have done this, and it suddenly deflates him again because he realizes he's not been given any sort of recognition for being good or special. It's just a connection, and that offends him in a principled way, as well as offending him in a personal way about his dad. And I think that is a really, really interesting sort of thing because, yeah, Hal is showing off and is sort of self-destructive, but it's almost as if his self-destruction, at least, is fueled by, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but there's almost like there is a rudderlessness to his life, but he's at least got some sort of a handle on what he wants, as opposed to Hector, who's just floating out there. And then Hector finally gets that moment where it's like, yes, this is what I want. This is hollow too. Like it's a really bittersweet sort of thing. What's interesting with the color palette in this, though, and the way that it's treated, what I was really reminded of was the Ed Norton Incredible Hulk movie.
Yes, thank you. I didn't think about that, but now that you say it, absolutely.
And what's frustrating about it is I think both of these movies they're perfectly entertaining. They're fine. They're good. But like the Hulk movie Ed Norton's Hulk movie gets just beaten up all the time. And like I've watched it a couple of times. It's like, I like
it personally. I mean, until the very end battle, which is not great, everything else I really enjoy.
Yeah, so I don't, and the thing is I don't understand what it is, because when we were when we're preparing for this and, I rewatch it, like, it's one of those things where as I was looking at it, I was like, I don't understand why. I understand why Superman 4 gets trashed. I understand why Batman and Robin gets curb stomped. I understand why nobody liked Highlander 2. But I look at Green Lantern and I say, like, we're having this conversation here. There's some good stuff going on. And these two characters are really good. And I think actually Carol is a really good character. And I think she gets overlooked because this movie gets stomped, but she's a really intriguing and engaging character. I liked her through the whole thing.
And I think, though, that's kind of where I see the issues with it, is that I end up caring more about Carol than I do about Hal. and it's not Carol's story. And so it's those things like that that are big for me that showed me issues I had with the movie as a whole, that were just like character driven problems. Not to say that it doesn't have its good parts. But I do think that this relationship between Hector and his father was one of the good things of the story as a whole. And I think that it really shows you how a slippery slope can happen where there's bad choices made on behalf of a parent that then drive the kid to continually make bad choices.
Yeah, that's a great point, Christy. And it's something that I thought was, as you were saying, both of you, like there's some really good stuff that's happening here. And I also personally really responded to this idea of like, we're talking about the power of fear throughout this entire movie. And, the Guardians even almost being afraid to say they're afraid, and that, and my favorite, I love it. My favorite saying on fear comes from John Wayne. It's like, courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway. And it's like, I love how this movie acknowledges that fear is a part of our lives, not for us to deny, but for us to face. And when we face the fear that's inside, that's where true courage comes in. It's not saying that there is no fear. It's saying, yes, I am fearful, but I am then, and this is where, the beautiful idea of the Green Lantern Corps, that willpower is the strongest power in the world because it is the thing that overcomes fear. And I kind of like that this whole movie is about, the Guardians kind of forgetting, being eternal beings. They have almost forgotten this whole idea. And it takes a young human being, from a very young planet to remind them of what willpower actually is, what courage actually means. And I love, Christy, you were mentioning, the fact that Carol has a great role in this, and you too, John. Like, I love that she's the one that reminds Hal that it's not about not being scared. It's about having the courage to overcome the fear, having the will to overcome. And to me, that's the beauty of why people love the Green Lantern Corps as characters. And it's a really nice theme, and I think it comes together very well with those two characters together.
Yeah, I actually want to say, though, that Carol also has what I think is probably my favorite, one of, if not my favorite moment in the movie, is when he comes down in his costume to the balcony talking to her in this very, it echoes Superman, Superman coming to Lois and talking to her and stuff like that.
If you want to live.
And she, but she looks at him immediately and says, Hal? And he goes, what? How did you, she's like, I've known you my whole life. You think I wouldn't recognize you because I can't see your cheekbones?
Yeah,
like
that was great.
That was a magnificent moment. And like, it's another one of those things where this movie has legitimately entertaining elements like that. But I think really Blake Lively needs to be given a lot of credit because the way she plays that scene, and Chrissy, I think this gets back to what you were saying, like, she seems to have been given all of the best moments or to have a part in all of the best moments in the film. And I think that is so weird that the secondary character gets to pull that off, because I think it really illustrates how key that sort of character is, while at the same time how important it is to strike that balance to make sure that one does not overshadow the other, that they play, properly with each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you need to have that, and I'm glad that we all are on the same page of like how powerful Carol was as a character, because she's driving these things to happen, like she does have that moment, like you mentioned, Matt, of where she's the one to tell him there's a name for that. It's called courage. And that you continue on in spite of that. And that's what willpower and courage are. And I like too that she shows how that people need to open up to their vulnerable side, because, especially in the scene where they're dancing and then he just literally drops her and runs away. You're going, oh man, no. And it's like, you're seeing that she's actually saying, again, I got too close and you decided not to open up to me. And so I wish that there had been a little bit more of that on Hal's side of like an aside, like you were saying, John, of an emotional realization moment.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree, because I think we talk about like the power feel, but the power of Blake Lively, in this film. And she's an underrated actress in many ways, and I absolutely adored her in this film. I thought that she does such a great job of having that strength you need in that female role, but she's also able to play the vulnerability perfectly. But the way she's able to poke at Hal's vulnerabilities is wonderful, and that's what you want from a relationship, right? I mean, Hal and Carol are a big deal in the comics, and part of that is her ability to kind of get him to get to the emotional core of things, and it's what makes for a good, successful relationship too, right? Like you got to be able to needle each other to become better people, not just be who you are, but to become the best version of yourself. And Carol and Blake Lively, I think, in this film make all the scenes that she's in with Ryan Reynolds are some of the best scenes in the movie. That scene when you were talking about when they're dancing and stuff. And so I absolutely agree. I think she's just so good in this movie, and she's one of my favorites, and I love, she gets the call out, her call sign is Starfire, or Sapphire, and in the comics she's becomes Star Sapphire, and a superhero alongside Hal. And so I just love they give those little nods to places they could go in the future. But regardless, she is a fantastic lead alongside Ryan Reynolds. And the fact that she can hold her own against Ryan Reynolds, who can be so larger than life with his humor and his personality, I think was another thing that just surprised me again rewatching the film.
And then made him fall in love with her in real life.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, who didn't fall in love with her after seeing this? I became a huge fan of hers after this. So
you mean it wasn't after Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants?
I mean, she was great in that, but this was a different story.
I missed that one somehow. I don't know how. I don't know how I missed that one.
Because you're not the demographic, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know. It's possible.
So, one of the things, though, I was rewatching this film, I remember, we're all so used to Ryan Reynolds at this point. But I was really surprised at the way, to me, he was able to kind of curb some of his Ryan Reynolds-ness and be slightly more emotional. Like, I love the scene when he's talking to his nephew, and you can tell he's having a hard time because he realizes he did almost just die. And he's the kind of guy who has a hard time expressing his emotions in the first place. You could tell when he's having the argument with his brother, about things. The look of his of kind of sadness on his mother's face. He hasn't had it easy since his dad died, and he hasn't had anybody to show him that. And I thought Ryan Reynolds did a great job with the portrayal of the character, bringing him to life. And all I would have wanted more of is, like you guys have mentioned already, I think if you just had a couple more moments for him to have some vulnerabilities, it would have been perfect. Like, this movie could have been like 4-star good if you had just allowed him to have just a couple more of those moments to help the character really blossom.
Yeah, and it's to speak to the performance, the director is always in control of that. And I think that there are Ryan Reynolds performances that are absolutely sublime. There's a great comedy, Just Friends, which I think is
so good with Amy Smart.
One of the funniest movies I've seen ever. But sorry, I'm thinking about the movie now, and so I'm laughing. Anyway, but then there are movies where he's just sort of let loose, like X-Men Origins Wolverine, where by the end of it, you're just like, would somebody please kill this character? Would he catch on fire?
Deadpool.
Anything?
Hey, now.
Yes. I was not as in love with the first Deadpool as other people were. I thought it was funny. I thought it was inventive. I thought it was clever, but it was very much obviously sort of like the way that some directors approached Robin Williams, where it was like, we're just going to turn the cameras on and you just do something, okay? And it's like I like to see a little more structure given to, because Reynolds has such tremendous timing and energy and intellect that he puts into everything, but you gotta give focus to an actor. And to hear him, what's interesting is to go back to that note where he said it's like we started shooting without a script. We started shooting with a poster and then worried about it later, sort of thing. That may be true, and he may be frustrated, but somehow it seems to have I guess maybe on set they knew at least that they couldn't go too far in one direction, and it feels like they put guardrails on him. And so I think he is a little bit more, and this is a weird way to put it, but I think he's a little more human than he can be in these superhero movies sometimes.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Although I love both the Deadpool movies, I definitely will agree that in both of those that they really let more of his personality as a person take over and become a lot more of the jokes. So I definitely think that in this movie you needed a more serious version of Ryan. And I think that the director helped get that across and really embrace those emotional moments you have with Hal by not letting Ryan Reynolds go too far into the jokes.
Well, I think that comes from Martin Campbell, like you guys are saying. I mean, GoldenEye and Casino Royale, two very different takes on Bond, right? But very controlled, very focused on who they want that main character to be and not letting them go too far one way or the other. And I think, I've seen critiques of this movie that they feel like kind of like it's all over the place with its tone, but I feel like the tone feels quite consistent to me throughout, in the sense of we're going for fun, enjoyable action that has some heart. And, to me, it's kind of like, it's very classic comic book sensibility of a movie, like in the most classic sense.
Yes, I think that one of the challenges with Green Lantern is that this is a movie made with comic book movie sensibilities from about 10 or so years before it. Comic book movies have gone through these different metamorphoses through time, and it always goes through the same cycle where it gets serious and then it gets a little too serious and then it starts to get silly and irreverent towards its own material, and then it reboots, and then it goes through this whole process all over again. And it feels like this movie was from sort of the midpoint of the phase or whatever. But what's interesting, I think, is in terms of tone, I think it is a pretty consistent tone through the whole thing. And I know that this statement may land me in hot water, but so long as Taika Waititi is in the movie, why not make the comparison? But it's sort of like, I don't understand how somebody could praise Thor Ragnarok, which I think does have a tone that just goes up and down like an FM frequency, as opposed to this is a little bit more even. There's a little bit more, even distribution to everything. And I'm not knocking Thor Ragnarok. I know people love Thor Ragnarok, but this at least knows exactly what it's going to be, as opposed to flipping from scene to scene. So I don't understand that specific criticism. And I don't know if it's because now that the landscape has changed so much, because this comes out in the wake of Iron Man and at the tail end of The Dark Knight. So those are the two poles of where comic book movies could go. and obviously going the way of the Marvel movie won out. But this feels very much in step with the early phase Marvel movies. So I don't understand why it would have been greeted the way that it was.
Yeah, I think as far as the tone goes, I didn't have any issue with that. I don't feel like it was all over the place tone-wise at all. It did feel like from the get-go and throughout that it was, you know, faced as a serious version of a comic book movie. Not dark like Dark Knight or something, but toward that end, at least, of like, there's a huge gravity to the situation at hand, and that they're not making light of that. It's more, you know, the jokes here and there where they make sense. So, yeah, I didn't have a problem with the tone at all. I agree.
And I think you guys are rightly calling out all the things here when it comes to tone. And I think, Christy, you just mentioned the humor. And I think that's another place where the humor here really works situationally. It doesn't feel like we're just trying to force in a joke. You know, the parts where we're letting Ryan Reynolds be Ryan Reynolds are because that's a part of the character, you know, like, you know, he was first talking to Carol because he's late, you know, and he's like, well, let's get off these pants and get me into a flight suit and get in the cockpit, you know, like that's him being that character, right? And being that kind of like jackass of a character who just thinks he's so funny and witty and all that stuff. And of course she can't resist. Nobody can resist, right? That's all part of that character who is hiding what's underneath that we'll see come out later on. But the rest of the stuff, you know, it's like they do a great job of inserting the humor, like, you know, in the fight scenes with him and Sinestro, and Sinestro's really going at him and like just berating him and tearing him down for basically being a human and just basically being a peon is what he considers him to be. You know, all that kind of stuff. I just think a lot of this to me just really worked. And again, tonally, I don't get that comparison. Part of that, I think, Christy, you mentioned specifically, we're going to take our world seriously, but that doesn't mean we're also not going to have some fun in that. Mm-hmm. And I think Mark Strong as Sinestro really adds that serious tone to help. I mean, you get a character like that, he's just so good.
Yeah.
And he allows you to be able to feel the gravity of the situation because he is the guy who is the head of the Green Lantern Corps next to the Guardians. He's the most respected, you know, and next to Abin Sur, who, you know, is the one whose ring, you know, Hal gets. And you can just see how he is a character who's so consumed with control, you know, how he's going to make that turn to become the evil Sinestro. Mm-hmm. You know, we all know if you're, you know, the comic books, he's going there. But like he's the military guy and like he's the law and order guy to the nth degree, and I think he just plays it perfectly. And I really liked his performance as Sinestro here. And honestly, it's a travesty to me that we didn't get to see him be evil Sinestro, because I think he would have done gangbusters awesome with it. So,
I think they did a great job of setting that up. And while we sit there and we say, you know, Hal feels secondary to his own story, let's remember that one of the greatest comic book movies ever created, 1989's Batman, directed by Tim Burton. I mean, people made the joke at the time and still make the joke now. It should have just been called Joker, because Jack Nicholson gets pretty much more screen time than actual Batman in that movie. And everybody loved Joker and everybody loved the film. And it's like, it can work. It's just that I think that there are so many other elements. It's not just one element versus another. So there are so many other elements competing for everybody's attention. I think there would have even been a better way to streamline it. But again, you can't even fix this in the editing phase, right? Mm-hmm. This is something that would have to be fixed in the script phase of, instead of having him show up and have, Jeffrey Rush's character, talk to him, and then have Michael Clark Duncan's character train him, and then have Sinestro have Sinestro show up. Well, okay, just have Mark Strong bookend Michael Clark Duncan. Have him introduced to everything. Michael Clark Duncan beats him up a little bit. Sinestro beats him up more and says, you haven't been paying attention. Like you've truncated the focus that much and brought it in that much more closely. But I do want to say that from a process standpoint, because of course I always fixate on editing, but this is edited by Stuart Baird, one of the greatest film editors in history. And
Not
he
directors,
is,
but editors, yes.
Yeah, no, he's a great editor. Well, and oddly enough, the Star Trek film he directed had some questionable editing choices, which just made no sense to me. But like, I look at all of the material here and I can't see anything that could be rearranged better. What I see is the best result of what was shot and put together. And I think that's a testament to the editing, is that even I think in less capable hands, all of these disparate elements, an hour into the movie, you're ready to walk out because it's like, what the F is even going on right now? Whereas with this, at least there's a flow and the story makes sense. And even as, Hector and Hal are both discovering their powers, that interplay, that juxtaposition works perfectly. And you're in it. You're with it. You're like, okay, I'm digging this. This is what's happening and everything like that. So I just always make a point to, I got to tip the hat to Mr. Baird for the guy knows his work when he's editing.
Yeah, I think for sure the issue that I think we're all kind of pinpointing on here is that the story to begin with the writing is the issue that causes other things to not work as well as they should. That the actors and the editor did the best they could with what they were given, but that there were some fundamental things you can't just fix in editing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you can't fix everything in post.
Right. As George would say.
Exactly.
George Lucas is about to bust through the door and be like, let me tell you a thing or two about a thing or two.
Hey, let George Lucas take, I'd love to see him take a crack at Green Lantern. So,
that would be interesting.
I did want to chime in, though, and say that I was really excited when I caught that Mark Strong was Sinestro, because I did know of Sinestro from the comics and, that he was going to turn and everything later. And then recently, my husband and I rewatched Shazam, where Mark Strong is the villain. And so I was going, oh, yes, good choice.
Yeah,
he's a great actor. He's a lot of fun.
And it's so fun, too, because he can play such a good guy, because like in the Kingsman series, he's a good guy. And he's so much fun in that. But he can also play a great villain. So, yeah, those British actors, they're great stuff. Villains. We have two villains, and sometimes in a movie that can seem like too much. Did you guys think it worked to have Hector Hammond, as a villain as well as Parallax? Or should they have just kept one and left the other? Or what do you think?
I think that they did okay with that. I ultimately felt like it wasn't too many, because you feel like Parallax is this literally larger than life thing that could take over like the universe, like a Thanos or something. Whereas I felt like Hector was his pawn, sort of like the henchman, rather than another equal level villain. Right.
Yeah. There's, you can handle it one way or the other. You can handle it as Penguin and Catwoman in Batman Returns, which is the bad way. Or you can handle it as this, which is one villain leads to the other. It's a build. And I think that it also speaks to the problem that they had. They seem to have solved the problem, actually, that the first Blade had, because the original ending of Blade had Steven Dorff turn into the Blood God, and he was literally this CGI whirling mess of blood. Ew. Or whatever. And test audiences saw it and were like, what is happening? And so that's why they went back and they reshot it, and it was Steven Dorff, doing slow motion kung fu. And with this, to have the build become, through the whole movie, you see what Parallax is. You see it build. You see him develop from trapped in the green as a humanoid body into this big thing that can go on an attack into this giant cloud that's devouring civilizations, it gives that abstract concept time to build while you have an on-screen villain that you can confront. And then once that villain is done, because he's been in contact with the main, like, I do think that for all of the other structural things, I think that is put together the right way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm agreeing with you guys. I don't honestly can't add anything to that, shockingly enough. I know everybody's used to me just like being really verbose, but I think you guys said it perfectly. It works to me the way that they set it up. And John, I think the way you talked about the structure of one leads to the other. Yeah, I mean, if you're going to have more than one quote-unquote villain in a movie, that's definitely the way to do it. You know, the other way not to do this is Spider-Man 3.
Or The Amazing Spider-Man 2. That would be another way not to do it.
I'd have to go back and rewatch that. I don't remember hating
No, you don't.
that.
Don't go back and rewatch
anyway,
that. Don't do it.
That's another conversation for another time. So we use CGI suits in this movie. So the Green Lantern suit is CGI. Obviously, it's 2011, so it's not the same CGI we'd have today. Even then, quite a difficult undertaking, I think, to do this. How does that work for you guys? Does it work for you guys?
I think that it doesn't look as great as it should. The suits, to me, look a little weird. I don't know how else to explain it other than it just seemed like something was off. Did you guys feel like that?
I think that they weren't ready yet for it. I think that today they're ready for it. Today they do it all the time. Just
technology-wise, they were pushing too far.
In Man of Steel, they're never wearing those big Kryptonian suits at the very beginning.
Right.
Those are all CGI. You would never know.
I think that I'm of the opinion that, yes, I recognize that they're not perfect, but at the same time, it doesn't bother me the way that it does other people, because I've made reference to him before. My friend Joey hates stuff like this. Don't roll it out unless it's ready to look as good as, what they can pull off today, sort of thing. But everything's a step, right? Like, you have your steps when you go through, and you have stuff like, Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And then ironically, Tamura Morrison introduces us to another full body CG suit. And this, he's like the guide of full body CG. Like, I love him. That's like his career path. But I'm fine with it. Like, I get it. They went for it. Might not have worked perfectly, but that's okay. That's fine.
I'm with both of you in the sense that, like, obviously it doesn't quite work. I think part of that is that the green that they choose is a little too green. I think they should have muted the color just a little bit.
Yeah.
To help.
Yeah.
I think it would have helped if it, and, so that's just part of it. But for the most part, to have this basically like energy suit is really cool. And in fact, that's where they went in the comics. When they did the Rebirth, it was basically that the suit is a part of the ring in that sense. It creates the suit. It's basically an energy field almost.
Like another construct.
Right.
Kind of, but it's a part of the package deal with the ring, and you put it on and you get the suit. So I think it's a great idea. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think, again, you just mute that color slightly, I think, and it helps with the realism factor just a little bit.
I think also the decision to have his face mask be CG was a mistake. Like, have it come in through CG, but I think having it then go to a real piece, you would have been less apt to look at the CG.
It's a good point. Yeah,
and you would have been looking at his face and contextualize the rest of it with your periphery, as opposed to, oh, that looks fake, and I know his eyes aren't that. Oh, and that looks fake too. I think it would have helped if they did it that way.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think practical effects there would have been better.
Yeah,
I'll say I think probably the reason they didn't, John, comes from the answer comes from Nick Anastasio when he talked about the reason that most of the time Cap carries around his shield in the movies. It's actually CGI. It's because it's easier for them to track what it's supposed to look like. So if you make the piece, it's harder for them to track. Does it look right every single time? but then you run into the problem, but it doesn't look right at all any of the time.
Right.
So, it's like I would pay for that unrealistic,
That's what I'm saying. It's like, you could have a medium shot when it comes in, and then when you switch from that point forward, from the first close-up, it's a real prosthetic piece put over top.
Okay, I got to ask you guys, because I think this might be the most disappointing part of this movie for me, is the score. James Newton Howard, who had worked with Zimmer on, Batman Begins, creates this great, cool theme for Batman. I would expect this to be something akin to like a cross between Superman and, Top Gun having a baby, score-wise, and it's, I would say, one of the lamest superhero scores. There's no theme.
Mm-hmm.
It's just boring. I was utterly disappointed because, Green Lantern, you have the opportunity to write a Green Lantern theme, and you don't give us one worth anything. And I was just, couldn't be more frustrated.
I think that I agree with you. I think that the score is not phenomenal, but I think that it's adequate, which I guess is damning with faint praise, sort of thing.
It's adequate.
That's the title. It's adequate.
Yeah, basically adequate lantern. The theme's not great, but the rest of the incidental music is apt and works. So it's kind of a trade-off.
Yeah, I'm kind of in between both of you as well with that it's okay. But I think that for sure it stands out, like Matt said, that there's not a specific theme for Hal in this movie, and that would have also helped with you feeling more connected to him as a character. Like when he takes off for the first time intentionally to go back to Oa or something like that, it's like a, heroic moment. Give us some heroic buildup, something. And you just don't really get that. And then, as well in the romance scenes, I think that there could have been more climactic music there to create that emotion. And it felt like it just kind of fell flat.
It's almost an interesting thought experiment, because if it had had a better score, would it have been better received? Because music can cheat that emotional beat so well.
Very good point.
I mean, John Williams probably could have killed it, but they didn't ask him to do it. So
they'd already spent so much money on the CG, they couldn't afford him.
That's true. Well, there's so much. I mean, honestly, I think there's other things we could talk about in the film, but I do think it's a great time to discuss then what we'd rate this, because I think we've all been able to talk about good things and some not so good things in the film. I think we've been much more fair to this film than any other reviewer was when it came out. So, John, if you were going to rate Green Lantern, the extended edition, what would you rate this?
The same I rated the theatrical, which is a solid 3. And I mean a solid 3. This is a cheeseburger. This is a bowl of soup and heavily buttered bread on a rainy day sort of movie where I'll sit down. I know I'm going to watch this again in my life. I'm never going to regard it as great cinema. But if I want something where I can just have something to just sort of like unplug and chill out for a little bit, this is the movie I'm going to go with. I could almost be talked into an extra half star just because it really is one of those things where the more you watch it, the more endearing it becomes, because there is such a playful aspect to it. And I think that Taika Waititi does a great job in his role and is a very fun sidekick character. So, I could be talked higher, but I'm going to stick with just a very solid 3. Popcorn movie, lazy Sunday, chilling out in my pajamas on a chilly day out. This is the type of movie I'm going to go with.
Okay. I like that you gave your reasons too, because I was trying to evaluate really where I end up with this, and I'm just a little bit lower. I'm going to give it a 2.5 out of 5. Because, to use your word, it's adequate. Yep. So I'd get a 50%. But it ultimately, for me, is not that kind of movie that I'm going to keep going back to just because I wanted more human connection. I feel like that was the biggest thing to me that didn't work, and it felt like the plot was dictating what the characters were going to do because, well, we need to get to this point rather than telling a really good human interest character story. And so it just kind of felt lacking depth to me overall. But there were some funny moments, and I love Ryan Reynolds, and I think overall they made really good casting choices. I just think it was, like I said, that depth and that level with the writing that they needed more time on.
You know, it's so funny because, and I don't know if it's just a product of this movie being absolutely trashed for so long that you go back to and you're like, wait, this is not that bad. What are you talking about? But I also think I just rewatching it, I came to appreciate a lot of the themes we talked about. I came to really appreciate the characterizations a lot more than I thought I would. You know, I think Reynolds and Lively are so good together. They have great chemistry. Mark Strong was fantastic. The storyline is pretty fun. They are trying to cram a lot in here, but you know, to me, I'm gonna go 3.5 stars out of 5 because I'm like you, John, where it's like, no, this is in the superhero rotation now. If I'm thinking of a superhero movie I might want to watch, this is actually my thought process. You know, of like, I might sit down and watch Green Lantern. You know, and I think it's so interesting, too, because some of the criticisms that you guys had about not being character-driven enough, I mean, they take those criticisms very seriously, and then they give you Man of Steel, where they're really trying to drive completely with the character of Clark. You know, like, that whole movie is that, you know, and then people didn't like that. And so it's just like, you end up with this whole thing, and it's like, you just... I think if there's one thing that you see with these comic book movies and the reasons why most of them are very successful, are the ones that are very successful, is that you have a person who kind of understands that character and has a passion for it, right? And, we kind of see that with, with The Mandalorian. You hear like Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni talking about those things. They have such a passion for it. They have such an understanding for it. They have so much fun working on it. I think, the most successful superhero movies are the ones where you really have somebody behind the scenes. Usually it's the director who's so passionate about the character, really gets the character, and then vibes the entire movie with that. And I think Martin Campbell does a great job of doing all he can with this film, but it does feel like you don't have somebody who has the ultimate Green Lantern passion to bring that character of Hal, truly to life in the way you'd want. And so, yeah, I mean, all in all, this movie does not deserve the reputation of like 32% or whatever it has on Rotten Tomatoes. It's just insane. So, even with our ratings here, I think it would level out at a 3. So,
and I mean, I'll say in terms of comic book movies, I'll watch this. I could rattle off comic book movies I'd watch before. That I would watch this before I would watch them again. Iron Man 2, Thor 2, Blade Trinity. Like I can just go down the list where it's like those are movies where I have sincere problems with them. This is just, it's fine. It's a good time.
It's fine. Well, before we get out of here, it's time for some recommendations. And so, John, this week, what do you want to recommend to everyone?
Oh, my goodness. The thing is, I'm going to go here and I'm going to say that one of my coping mechanisms during stressful times has become Disney's Haunted Mansion. I am a hardcore devoted fan of that ride. And I went so far as to purchase, because you can't get certain key tracks on Spotify, there's an album of the music from the Haunted Mansion, the first track of which is essentially the soundtrack to the entire ride. Like, if you've been on the ride, you can listen to it, and you are at each point in the ride, and it goes through, and it's tremendous fun. So I will recommend that, because we're not that far from fall and the Halloween season. So, let someone be your ghost host and take you through the creepy crawly sensations.
I don't want to think that we're that close to Halloween yet.
Closer than you think. It's March 152nd. Halloween will be here any day.
So something that I wanted to recommend, and it's we've been moving, but I have John knows this, and he kind of guilted me into finally doing this, watching the Fast and the Furious series, and I have to say I just watched 6 and 7 in the series. And this series, I would say, gets good by 5, and it's continued to be good since then. 4's not great. 3, though, is good. So if you watch 3 and skip to 5 and to 6 and to 7, it's good stuff. I'm actually enjoying it. It's one of the few series where the dumber the movies get, the better they are. In the sense of like what the actual plot of the movies, it just gets so outrageous, but that's what actually makes them more fun. And so, yeah, the dumber the better. And so I'm going to say, go check out some Fast and Furious the movies. If you want, 3 is good. And then skip 4, watch 5 and 6 and 7. I have yet to watch The Fate of the Furious yet, but I'm excited to do that. And then... like the rest of the world, I'm waiting for Furious 9, or whatever it's called, to come out next year.
Supposed to be out this year.
Even more furious. Is that what they're going to call it?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
No,
and I've seen Hobbs and Shaw, which is also really enjoyable. So
I still, you know what? If I can share a funny story, when we were on the cruise back around Christmas time, they showed a movie on the pool deck and everything like that. And I snuck out with the middle child at one point, and Hobbs and Shaw was what was being shown. And I was like, hey, you want to sit down? Maybe just sit there and watch. We didn't watch the whole thing, but it got to the ending where like all of this stuff is happening, and God bless her. She looks at me, she goes, that's not scientifically possible, is it? I said, no, honey, just go along with it. It's fine. It's fine.
It's not, but that's where, again, it's the dumber the better. And that's what's fun about it. So,
yeah.
And I actually do have a cool thing to recommend I'm excited about. Something that's really helped me during everything with the pandemic right now and like kind of keeping that laughter alive is I discovered a YouTube show. I don't know if you've heard of Good Mythical Morning, but it's these two guys that happen to be best friends that are from the Carolinas originally, so the Southerners like me. And they do a show where they basically just try to like do weird things with food. They have a whole series they do called Will It Blank. And so they'll take different foods, for example, and try to say, will it taco?
Interesting.
Yeah. Or like,
interesting.
They just did one this week that was like, what's the best of 6 different top selling hard ciders? And so it was hilarious because, the more hard cider you drink, the more loopy you get.
Fair.
But,
yes.
the best part of it is that it's two guys that are best friends hanging out together. So it feels very genuine.
Very cool.
And then Link is kind of the more clumsy one. And he says things all the time that are definitely innuendo and honestly doesn't realize he's doing it until it's too late.
So if his name is Link, please tell me his girlfriend or his wife is named Zelda?
No, but the weird thing is his wife's name is Christy.
Oh, dear. Wait a minute. Maybe they came from a parallel universe.
Maybe. It's the alternate me.
There you go.
But yeah, so I highly recommend Good Mythical Morning with Rhett and Link.
That sounds like a lot of
really
fun.
Good.
That's awesome. Well, John, before you get out of here, where can people find you on the old interwebs?
If they really want to, they can find me as Kessel Junkie on your social network of choice. Letterboxd is the most fun. I'm writing again on kesseljunkie.com because without a commute, why not? More time, I guess. And you can find me over on the Nerd Party, Summer 2020, co-hosting with Brandon Shea Mutala and Tristan Riddell, a series called House of Fincher, where we are going through the works of David Fincher as we count down to his new Netflix movie, Mank. And I am co-hosting a little old Star Wars podcast over there called Aggressive Negotiations with Matthew Rushing.
Which is an excellent show.
Thank you so much. That's very nice of you to say.
Welcome. And of course, you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for now at Bespin Bell. Right. And I do a couple of other shows in addition to 602 Club. I do a show with my friend Teresa called Sabers and Spells. And we cover anything geeky we feel like, from Harry Potter to Star Wars to Stranger Things. And I do a show called Planet Leia on the Fanthatrix Network with 5 other women from around the world talking about Star Wars.
And you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, Vero, under the name Mattersham02. I am here on the network doing The Orb with Chris Jones. When we get a chance, we talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Actually about to dive back into literary treks as well, so you'll hear that soon. You can also find me on the aforementioned Nerd Party Network, not just doing Aggressive Negotiations with John Mills, but I'm also doing Owl Post with Drea Kaufman, as we're talking about every chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. And we're actually in the Deathly Hallows these days, so it's so much fun as we're making our way to the end. But thank you so much for joining us.
And y'all come back now, you hear?